Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the comprehensive news analysis with the first article that is about the news that is shaking the entire world since yesterday. That is Russia's attack on Ukraine. Now, you might call it an invasion, you might call it a special military operation that Vladimir Putin is calling it, but the fact is that the Russian military right now is inside Ukraine and is attacking multiple Ukraine cities. The article here is trying to make a point that number one, Russia was forced to go into the offensive, and second, the reason why US or NATO have not been able to give a counter to Russian army is because they have not been prepared for it. And over the years, NATO's unity also has become pretty weak. Now there are many countries in NATO which have different ideologies. Many NATO countries right now do not really accept America's superiority over themselves, and that is why NATO has not been able to present a united front, which is what we are seeing right now. In fact, the Ukrainian government also made a statement that they have been left out alone by the Western world after all the promises of America and the NATO nations that we are with you and we will protect you. But when the time actually came, no NATO country has come out to help Ukraine apart from just imposing some sanctions on Russia. The author here, who himself is a former ambassador to Russia, so knows Russia in and out, is trying to say that over the past few years, the reason why Vladimir Putin has been able to increase his or her powers is because he has been able to understand the fact that NATO as a group and America's leadership is not what it used to be. This all began when Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin met last year in June 2021. This is when Joe Biden had promised that he wanted to improve the US-Russia relationship, which had gone from bad to worse in the last 7 years. Now, this summit gave an opportunity to Vladimir Putin. He saw this as an opportunity to negotiate with US as an equal partner and not as a country whose economy is not even one-fourth of that of the US. Since that particular summit, Putin had made it very clear to US and to the other Western allies that Russia will not hang back until its own security concerns are met. And the Russians would be willing to go to any extent to ensure that their security is not compromised. And that is what is happening in Ukraine right now. One thing that many experts have been saying this time around is, unlike the 2014 incident when Russia went ahead and annexed Crimea from Ukraine, this time around, Russia has been trying to repeat time and time again what exactly are the things that they need. They have been trying to tell their grievances to the Western world so that no one can accuse Russia of attacking Ukraine without any reason. Russia, for instance, has been saying that the expansion of NATO towards the Russian border is against the promises that were made to the Soviet Union before the Soviet Union had disintegrated. Secondly, Russia does not like NATO's strategic posture. That is, as a member of NATO, almost every country has some American missiles and European missiles stationed into them. That is what Russia does not appreciate. Thirdly, NATO's expansion to countries at the border with Russia, including Romania, Estonia, Poland, etc., has again not gone well with Russia. All these things have been reiterated by Russia time and time again, but there has not been any commitment given to Russia by US or other countries about them taking back any of these steps. As I said, the author is making a point that NATO nations are not presenting a united front right now, and there are many reasons for that. The NATO nations right now have a very varied economic development status. There are a lot of diverse political traditions, so it's not that all the NATO countries think in a similar manner. Different NATO countries have a different point of view about world politics right now. Earlier, when the NATO was initially formed and till 1960s, 70s, the American leadership of NATO was a by default thing that everyone accepted. But this has also not been accepted by default over the past few years. We have seen yesterday also in the CNA how France has not been on a good term with the US, especially after the US undermined the French deal of the submarines with Australia. Similarly, Germany has its own concerns. So the two biggest NATO allies of the US, France and Germany, have some other concerns and they are not on the same page as the US. Not just this, it was the US only that put pressure on NATO in 2008 to offer a membership to Ukraine, which started all these problems and led to the annexation of Crimea also in the year of 2014. Recently also, The US President Joe Biden, time and time again, has said that we want the two nations to follow the Minsk Accord that was signed in 2014 and 2015 about the ceasefire between the two sides, which we discussed yesterday. But the fact is that in reality, no action has been taken by the US or the Western allies to make sure that these Minsk Accords are being fulfilled. Another interesting part in this entire equation is played by the concept of energy security. Now, a lot of NATO members that are European countries are actually dependent on Russia in some way or the other for their supply of oil and gas. Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of oil and gas to Europe, and because of its geographical proximity, the cost of oil and gas coming from Russia to Europe is often the cheapest. That is why a lot of NATO countries right now cannot afford to take a stand strictly against Russia. That includes Germany as well. For example, Germany has a Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia, which will supply cheapest source of gas for the German industry. There are many experts who are suggesting that the reason that US does not want Europe to buy oil and gas from Russia is because US wants its own oil and gas to go to Europe, although it comes at a higher cost, but that will meet the economic interests of the US. So somewhere down the line, there are many countries in NATO that might not really trust America's own intentions behind making any decisions as a part of NATO. As far as the Indian government is concerned, it is easy to understand that we cannot really afford to take a side against Russia at this point of time. Our Prime Minister did speak to Mr. Putin last night, but again, there were no concrete outcomes that came out apart from the fact that India's official position remains that we want a diplomatic solution to this situation and we want both the sides to accept that non-violence is the way to go ahead. Apart from that, India does not have that much leverage over Russia that it can actually ask Russia to stop down on what their plans are. So the biggest priority for India is to ensure the safety of the Indian citizens who are in Ukraine right now. And that is why we have tried to set up a communication channel with the Russian leadership since yesterday. Now, there's a very interesting point of view given by some very acclaimed international writers. That is, why is it that Russia is not really bothered about sanctions? At the end of the day, when the US and other Western countries are announcing sanctions on Russia, countries such as Germany, France, etc., are saying that we will not have any trade with Russia. Canada also said that we would not export anything to Russia. At that point of time, why is it that it is not bothering Russia so much? The reasons might lie in what exactly is the Russian economy doing and the present status of Russian economy, which many of us are not really paying a lot of attention to. So let me share with you a few interesting facts to understand why exactly is Russia not bothered about them. In 2014, when Russia actually annexed Crimea, it saw a lot of sanctions from the Western nations, along with a drastic decline in the global oil prices. So 2014 was the worst time for Russian economy. They were not earning a lot by selling their oil and gas, and they had to face a lot of Western sanctions. Since then, the Russian government has taken a lot of steps to ensure that that situation does not arise again. Since 2014, Russia has been very focused and disciplined on its financial spending and also has made sure that these kind of sanctions again are not in a situation to hurt Russia. Now, let me share a few facts with you. For instance, for the Russian government, their debt to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the entire world. Their debt to GDP ratio is only 14%, 1/4. It is the lowest amongst the 20 largest emerging economies around the world. Just for comparison's sake, for Indian government, the debt to GDP ratio is close to 61%. So they don't really have a lot of foreign debt. Secondly, the amount of foreign currency reserves that Russia has is humongous. They have the fourth largest foreign currency reserves right now, that is about $580 billion. In 2015, it was only $350 billion and they have increased it to $580 billion right now. Now again, for comparison, if you see India's foreign currency reserves are about $634 billion or near about. But you have to consider that if you consider this by per capita measure, that is when Russia wins hands down. Russia's population right now is somewhere near 14 crore. So almost 10% of India. So a country with 10% of India's population having foreign currency exchange reserves of $580 billion is huge. Not just this, the short term debt that Russia has to immediately repay is only 10% of its foreign currency reserves. For most other emerging countries, this number is at least 30%. So, most other countries, the debt that they had to repay immediately is about 30% of their foreign currency reserves, which is only 10% for Russia. Also, add to that the fact that the global oil prices are at an extremely high level. They have just touched the $100 mark and they do not really seem to go down in the near future. So, all things considered, the Russian economy right now is in a very satisfactory position, and that is why the foreign sanctions on Russia will not really harm them anymore. Not just this, Russia now has China as its largest buyer of oil and gas, and they are at peace with the European nations not really buying their oil and gas because they know that most of it will anyways be sold to China at good prices. The only problem that Russia right now is facing in terms of economy is about the growth rate. In the past decade or so, their growth rate has just been 2%. But apart from that, they don't really owe a lot of money to the foreign nation, and that is why they're not under a lot of economic pressure to take back their decisions. That is the inside story of the plan. The second article that we have here focuses on India's food systems and agriculture. The authors here are trying to make a simple point. That is, for too many years now, since the 1960s, since the beginning of Green Revolution, India has been focused on ensuring food security. Food security means we have been focused on ensuring that people have enough food on their plates. But the problem now is that people do have enough food on their plates. The problem is about the nutrition. What is the nutritional value of the food that they have? Despite India having godowns filled with wheat and rice and overflowing godowns, with the Food Corporation of India not having enough space to store those food grains, we are in a position that we still account for a large number of hungry population in the world. Because hunger is not really defined as empty stomach. Hunger is defined as lack of nutrients in your meal. And that is why the authors here are saying that rather than focusing on having the maximum quantity of output from our agriculture, our focus now should be to increase the nutritional value of our food to ensure long-term nutritional outcomes for our population. The article says that recently there was a summit of UN food systems that talked about 5 actions that the government must take to fulfill the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These 5 actions included nourishing all the people, boosting nature-based solutions, advance equitable livelihood, decent work and empowered communities, build resilience to vulnerabilities, and also shocks and stress and accelerate the means of implementation. If these 5 things are looked into by all the nations around the world, they would be on a path to meet the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that have to be met by 2030. The article takes us back to the 1960s, the time when India was short of food, the time when we did not have enough food grains and we were dependent on US that used to supply us bad quality food grains under their PL 480 program, because of which we were able to sustain our population. In 1960s, India took a conscious effort to ensure that we don't have to go to any country for our food security purposes and we have enough food grains of our own. And that is when the Green Revolution came into the country. Green Revolution was for the first time an effort to implement science and technology and new techniques in Indian agriculture. Before that, India's history of agriculture has been very old, but there has not been a lot of science and technology and research being used into it. It is more of hit and trial process. Green Revolution was for the first time when a lot of science and technology was used and utilized by the government at the ground root level, and we saw the results of those green revolutions throughout the country. Under the Green Revolution program only, we also started the training and visit system in 1970s with the World Bank assistance to ensure that science becomes a key part of India's agriculture at the local level. This training and visit system was kind of an educational system for the farmers, where the group of farmers were taken regularly to different fields, research institutions related to agriculture, and they were trained about the best agricultural practices. In fact, the farmers who were trained under this system in India were actually requested to go to the other nations also, such as Canada, etc., where they can go and pass on this knowledge about agriculture. And many of them actually chose to settle overseas and became agriculture pioneers in the other nations as well. As a result of which, India became self-sufficient in the food grain production. But on the other hand, the irony is that India still has a quarter of the world's most insecure food people. About 18.7% of Indian women and 16.2% of men don't have enough food to meet basic nutritional needs. The simple concept is, if I lock you up in a house and if I give you only rice to eat for the entire year, you will not be hungry, you will not die of hunger. But as per international levels, you will be considered as a hungry person because you're not getting the required nutrition in your body. So we have enough food right now, but not enough nutritional food. About 32% of children below the age of 5 are still underweight as per the 5th National Family Health Survey. That is why it is time for India to switch from food security to food systems to sustainability and better nutrition. In order to do that, we have to focus on a lot of things, not just on agriculture, but also on aggregation, processing of the food, distribution, and consumption related patterns. Some of the problems that we are facing which are leading to these issues is that we have soil nutrition that is being depleted over the years because of overuse of water, overuse of nutrients, overuse of pesticides, etc. In many agriculture heavy states such as Punjab, Haryana, you see that the groundwater level is declining day by day. We also have seen excess use of agrochemicals because a lot of them are available to the farmer at subsidized prices. They don't even have to pay water bills, etc. And that is why there is excessive use of water and chemicals in the fertilizer. There's also a large income gap between the large and the small farmers that also has to be looked into. Also, many of India's areas which are under agriculture are dependent on rain and monsoon and don't really have 100% reliable irrigation facilities. All these mean that the food coming out of the Indian soil might not be the best nutritional food as compared to the other nations around the world. The focus, that is why, has to be on supporting the business growth in the rural economy, incentivizing farmers to switch to other grains. Because the government ensures a good MSP for rice and wheat, even the farmers in the most fertile lands of, let's say, Punjab, are not really willing to switch to some other crops which might be much more nutritional and which might give them a more value in the market. So the government has to encourage the farmers, make them more confident about switching to other nutritional products that we can have and we can serve to our population at good prices. The government must also ensure that we have good infrastructure and we give proper support to those entrepreneurs who want to enter in the field of education by giving them a proper production value chain. The state and the center governments here should work together and have a policy that is in line with each other. Just like we had the National Policy Guidelines of 2012 of the Ministry of Agriculture that talked about promotion of farmer producer organizations. Now, agriculture is one of those topics which are very recurrent in your examination. It is very common to see either an essay topic related to agriculture, or you can also see questions with regards to agriculture in your GS3 paper, because it is one of those topics that are relevant not just in real life but also remain in the news for various reasons. That is why it is always advisable to keep a few points about agriculture handy. That is the problems in Indian agriculture, the initiatives that the government is trying to take, etc. So, for example, the main issues with Indian agriculture right now are that there are varying yields across the state. 1 hectare of land would give you much more yield in a state such as Punjab as compared to, let's say, our area in eastern UP or in Bihar. There is a large gap between rice and wheat yields across the country. The green revolution that we take so much pride in only impacted a few states, Punjab, Haryana, western UP, but not the entire country. Not just state by state, but across the country. On an average, if you see the yield that we have, it is much lower as compared to the other nations. For example, India had a food grain production of close to 300 million tons in 2019-2020. We accounted for about a quarter of the world's pulses production in 2017. However, if you look at the yield per hectare, it was the lowest amongst the top 10 countries. Our yield per hectare is about 664 kg, while the world average is over 1000 kg per hectare. Similarly, despite being the second largest producer of paddy and wheat after China, India reports a lower yield as compared to most other countries, including China, which might be because of various reasons. Quality of soil, not adequate fertilizers or chemicals being used with the plants, not enough irrigation facilities, etc. Then we also face a lot of infrastructure related issues because a lot of agricultural fields right now are dependent on monsoon and rains and they don't have 24/7 irrigation facilities. Not just this, we have to understand that agriculture is much more than just the agricultural fields. After we have the crop, we also have to supply it to the market, for which we need good roads, we need adequate power supply so that the water and irrigation setup can also work properly. We also are facing a problem of degradation of natural resources, as we discussed earlier. Bad quality of soil, bad quality of water resources are harming our agriculture. And then the issue of Indian government focusing more on food security. See, the problem is, if you look at our history, India has been one of those countries that has faced famine many times. We have been unfortunate enough to see situations where people in India have died of hunger for multiple times. And because we are fearful of that and we don't want that situation to be repeated, we always focus on ensuring that we have enough stock of the daily food that we eat, that is rice and wheat, rather than focusing on the other more nutritional crops that would also be in demand in the export market. We are more focused on ensuring our food safety. So that also has to be diversified. Some suggestions include liberalizing farming, giving the freedom to the farmers to connect to the private market directly, giving the farmer the freedom. For example, let's say there's a farmer in Assam, giving him the freedom to export his stuff to any other country or to any other state also, without having to follow a lot of government rules. Also, we have to improve the agricultural institutions, that is, the Food Corporation of India. While they do a good job in procuring rice, wheat, and other crops from some states, some other states argue that they have not been given this facility. Then also decentralizing the system, allowing the states also to ensure that they can have their own kind of policies and laws, and not just states, allowing the local level area farmers also to decide their own policies. The next article that we have here is an interview that focuses on a simple question. India is seen as a land of startups. Every few weeks, we see the news that a new unicorn is born in India. The question here is, are these unicorns or are these new companies coming into India at such a fast pace? Are they even making any new jobs or not? So, is a new economy creating new jobs or not? That is what the question is. The article here says that India, so far in 2022, in just a couple of months, has already added 10 unicorns. So, unicorn is a private company that is valued at over $1 billion. A private company means a company whose shares, etc., are not listed in the stock exchange, and the company is over $1 billion in valuation. That is a unicorn. Last year, India had 44 companies turning into a unicorn. So, right now, India is considered as a third country in the world after US and China to have the largest number of unicorns. If you look at India's history, the first unicorn that India had was in Mobi. This company took about 5 years to turn into a unicorn. The next unicorn in India was in Flipkart, which again took 4 to 5 years to become one. What the authors here are pointing towards is that the number of years or the number of months that it is taking for a company to turn into a unicorn is now constantly shrinking, because a lot of capital from the venture capitalists is flowing into India, and that is why the companies are inflating their valuation very, very quickly. Uniforms, as I said, essentially are venture capital funded and they reach a valuation of $1 billion. This flowing of venture capital fund into India has increased considerably in the last decade. Over 10,000 companies of India were funded by these venture capitalists in the past 10 years. While it makes all the headlines and we see the glory in a company becoming a unicorn and a $1 billion company, the reality might not be what we actually assume. These $1 billion companies or companies which have a valuation which is skyrocketing have a lot of pressure on themselves to perform, and many of them have actually succumbed to that pressure. We also see a lot of companies closing down year after year just because they were not able to sustain the pressure that was applied on them by the venture capitalists and by the outside investors. Thus, we need to focus more on what the company does and their business fundamentals rather than the valuation of the company. The article here says that the companies that are solving real problems with real customers will eventually become winners in the long run. You don't really have to focus on their valuation, because valuation is a game of a venture capitalist pumping money into your company if he has some extra money. That can go up, that can go down, but fundamentally the good point is that good companies are being made out of India. One of the reasons why a lot of companies in India are on that acceleration path is that over the past few years we have seen a great data penetration in India. The cost of accessing internet in India is one of the lowest in the entire world, And that is why even a person who is not earning a lot of money is able to go online. As a result of which, there's a large customer base for a lot of companies in India. That is why a lot of venture capitalists are now interested in putting their money in India. So much so that it has become so easy that in many companies, venture capitalists are ready to invest money just on WhatsApp conversations and they don't even need a real presentation. Thus, there is now a kind of a race between the venture capitalists. Venture capitalists, by the way, are those people who want to invest in new companies. There's a race amongst the venture capitalists about who would invest in which company so that later on their valuation can double and they can make a lot of profit out of it. The second half of the article focuses on the real topic. That is, are these new startups even creating new jobs or it is just a hype that we are seeing? The author here says that yes, the startups are creating jobs, but you can't really compare them with a, let's say, manufacturing industry. As you know, a manufacturing unit would give jobs to a lot more people as compared to a company working in the service sector. And most of these big unicorns that we are seeing are actually from the service sector. So, yes, there are startups that are creating new jobs. For example, Freshworks that recently had its IPO. It started with just a few dozen employees and now there were over 3,000 employees with Freshworks. Many of these employees in the startups leave to start their own company and then it starts a chain of people who would employ other people. The good part is that these kind of startups actually create high quality jobs. The number of jobs might not be in the lakhs, but at least they are creating high quality jobs. They are ensuring that people having a good skill level can actually have jobs in these areas and can earn a fair bit of money. There are a few examples of startups that are actually employing a lot of people. Let's say Zomato, Swiggy, that need a lot of people who are delivering food for them. So food aggregators, etc., are employing a lot of people. But that is not true with a lot of other companies. Like IT companies or other companies that are now becoming unicorns don't employ thousands and lakhs of people. And that is why the job creation in India is not proportional to the number of companies that are becoming unicorn, and you might have expected more, but that is really not the case of what is happening in India. The other reason is that when you create a startup, as a founder, your focus is not really about giving as many jobs to the people as possible. Your focus is on earning a lot of profit. And earning a lot of profit might mean employing lesser people to save on the salary. That is why, again, we cannot expect that just because we have a lot of startups, just because we have a lot of unicorns, automatically it would result in a lot of jobs being created. Also, one of the reasons why we have a lot of startups coming up is because the government also has made some efforts to encourage these companies. Let me give you an example. The Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade recently made a statement about the startups in India. The secretary of the department said that government registered startups in India have created 6.5 lakh jobs in the entire country. The secretary said that more than 60,000 startups have been recognized by the department since 2016. So, on an average, a startup is creating at least 11 jobs for the people in India. The department is focusing on creating 20 lakh new jobs in the sector by registering at least 50,000 new startups in the next 4 years. If you look at the website of Startup India, you would see that getting recognized by the government as a startup gives a few benefits. For example, you get tax exemption for 3 consecutive years and exemption on capital gains and investment above the fair market value. Not just this, it also gives you a process of easily winding up a firm in case you're facing losses and you want to shut it down. Within 90 days, you can shut down your business, and it also helps you to fast track 80% of rebate on filing of patents. So if you're filing a patent, the government will ensure that you get at least 80% of the rebate on the patent fee. The center is also establishing a 10,000 crore rupee fund of funds under SIDBI to meet the financial needs of these startups. Of this 10,000 crore, 6,500 crore has already been committed in this particular fund. So we must appreciate the government also for creating such a kind of environment for encouraging startups in the country. The next article that we have is about Indus Water Treaty, a topic that you might have read about multiple times whenever we talk about the India-Pakistan relations. In simple terms, the Indus River and the tributaries of Indus is shared between India and Pakistan. How would the water be shared is decided under the Indus Water Treaty. The reason why we are discussing this is that a 10-member delegation from India will visit Pakistan on February 28 as a part of meeting of the Permanent Indus Commission, and they will take up issues about the water treaty that exists between the two countries since 1960. It is expected that, like earlier as well, Pakistan will raise up some issues and objections about Indian hydropower projects in the Chenab Basin in Jammu and Kashmir, apart from some other hydroelectric power plants India is setting up in Ladakh. Now, the issue is that the Indus River Basin has a total of 6 rivers, Indus and the 5 tributaries, that is Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas and Satluj. Now, they originate in Tibet, then they come to India, and then after India, they enter Pakistan. Now, when India got partitioned, we also had to decide how exactly would the water flow take place. In 1948, an agreement was signed that India would supply water to Pakistan and Pakistan would make an annual payment to India against that particular water supply. But that agreement really could not go ahead because Pakistan kept on saying that India is not supplying enough water and India did not agree to it, etc. That is why we needed a new agreement with a third party in between. Now, why did the World Bank come in between? Usually, we don't really see World Bank coming between two countries signing such an agreement. This exception was because in 1951, both India and Pakistan approached the World Bank for funding of their irrigation projects on this water system. The World Bank then said, okay, let us mediate between the two, and thus in 1960, the Indus Water Treaty was signed. As per the treaty, out of the 6 rivers, 3 were given to India and 3 were given to Pakistan. So the western rivers, that is Indus, Chenab and Jhelum, were given to Pakistan. The eastern rivers, that is Ravi, Beas and Satluj, they were given to India. Now on the paper, you might see this is fair, 3 rivers to India, 3 rivers to Pakistan, but that is not true. Because out of the total water of the 6 rivers, 80% water was in the rivers that actually went to Pakistan and only 20% water was given to India. So Indian rivers, at the 3 rivers that we had, only made up 20% of the water. Experts say that it is a very unique treaty in the sense that whenever a water sharing treaty is signed, the upper riparian state from where the water first flows usually always has the advantage. But over here we are seeing that the upper riparian state has only taken 20% of the water. India was also allowed to have minimum storage level on the Pakistani rivers. So from Pakistan's river, we were allowed to store about 3.75 million acre feet for the conservation and flood storage purposes. Apart from that, the treaty said that both the nation would establish a permanent Indus Commission. This is the commission which is meeting on 28th of Feb for exchanging information, and they would also be the first level of resolving any dispute between the two nations. The treaty also said that India can build hydropower projects on Pakistan's rivers if they are run-of-the-river projects. Now, usually when you see dams being built, there are 2 types of dams. One, run-of-the-river dams, and second are storage dams. Just understand this. Run-of-the-river dam means, let's say water is coming from here, the turbine is actually fixed here, the water will make the turbine move and then the water will actually flow past. So in the run-of-the-river dams, there is no storage of water that is happening. Water is coming from behind, it is moving the turbine and then it is flowing. So there is no water storage that is happening, there is no diversion of water. This is allowed because India is not taking away water from Pakistan. Storage dam, on the other hand, means the water is coming from behind, it is then stored in a large reservoir and then the water is let out whenever the government wants to produce electricity. So storage dam means that the other side will not have enough water. So the treaty said that India can build run-of-the-river dams on Pakistan's rivers also because the river water will not be reduced. Apart from that, the treaty said that if India is making any such project, Pakistan can raise objections if they think that the project is against the treaty, and India also has to share the information about project design, etc. with Pakistan. Pakistan can raise objections in 3 months. This again is a point that is really criticized by experts in India. No water treaty in the world gives such a big right to the lower riparian state to raise objections on any project that the upper riparian state is making. Which is why whenever India makes any hydroelectric power projects on Pakistan's rivers, we see that objections are raised and that is why the projects get delayed. The biggest example is the Kishan Ganga hydroelectric project. Kishan Ganga, as we know, is a tributary of Jhelum. Jhelum is one of the rivers that were given to Pakistan. The work on this project started in 2007, but even before the work had to start, Pakistan objected, saying that the height of the dam is too much and they are now taking our water, we will not allow it. Thus, India lowered the height from 97 meter to 37 meter. Pakistan again was not happy. In 2010, then they approached the second level, that is the International Court of Arbitration, and objected that India is diverting water from Kishanganga, which is not allowed. After hearing the matter for 3 years, the court favored India. Pakistan again was not happy. Then they went to the World Bank. Basically, at every single level, Pakistan just wanted to delay the project by whatever means possible. India finally won this case at the World Bank also, and we started the construction of the project. When all the legal methods failed, Pakistan in 2016 started firing at the dam site so that the work could not complete. But India persisted and inaugurated the project in 2018. This is just an example of how Pakistan has been trying to delay India's work on these projects. Apart from this, also, there have been some problems in the treaty. For example, whenever Pakistan has attacked us, like the Uri attack, the Pulwama attack, the Indian side and the Indian critics have always said that this treaty should not be followed by India because Pakistan is not following the terms of the treaty. If they're killing our people, why do we have to give them water? In fact, Prime Minister Modi, after the Uri attack, had famously said that blood and water cannot flow simultaneously. After Pulwama also, India for the first time in the history threatened that we would cut down the water supply. Now there are two problems with that. Number one, if we walk out of the treaty, it would harm our international prestige, so we cannot really afford to do that. India is regarded as a country that fulfills all the treaty obligations whenever we sign them. Second problem is that we don't have a water sharing agreement with China. And since all these rivers come from Tibet region, what if China starts diverting these river waters from Tibet itself? Then we would be in a similar position that Pakistan is right now. And that is why India cannot afford to take any unilateral action. That doesn't mean that India does not have the right to protest. India has the right to make changes in the treaty as per the law, as per the provisions that are given in the treaty. This map will give you an idea about the flow of these rivers. As you can see, the Indus River, the Jhelum and the Chenab rivers, these are the rivers which were given to Pakistan, and then Ravi, Beas and Satluj were the rivers that were given to India. Now, you would also ask, why did India agree to take only 20% of the water? The reason is that the flow of these three rivers is very critical to India. The reason is that these rivers go through that part of India from where India does not really have a lot of other water supply. For example, the Indira Gandhi Canal in Rajasthan that starts from the Harike Barrage in Punjab, few kilometers below the confluence of Satluj and Beas, and the Bhagra Nagal Dam, both of them get supply from these rivers only, and that is why India had to be content with the east rivers. Not just this, India had even paid 83 crore rupees to Pakistan at the time of partition to build their replacement canals for the western rivers that they are getting. Now, one of the reasons that India cannot unilaterally walk out of the treaty is because we are a signatory to the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties, which is an international agreement governing the treaties between the two states. It was adopted in 1969, and India respects its signature, and thus we value these rivers. So we are ready to negotiate better terms, but we are not one of those countries that will unilaterally walk out of this treaty. Now, the treaty's article number 12 says that from time to time the treaty may be modified, but by a duly ratified treaty concluded for that purpose between the two governments. Now, we know for sure that Pakistan would not really want to redo this treaty because they are in a more favorable situation right now. So what India has to ensure is that under the treaty, the rights that India has been given on Pakistan's river, at least we should utilize that. We can build a lot more run-of-the-river dams and utilize that capacity. It is said that those rivers that flow to Pakistan have a capacity of over 11,000 megawatt electricity, and India is only utilizing about 3,000 megawatt out of it. That is why we should expedite those projects. The government has worked in that direction also. The Tulbul navigation project on Jhelum, Bagliha project on Chenab, the Bursar hydroelectric project on a tributary of Chenab, all of these are projects which are utilizing the water of the western rivers that will be going to Pakistan. And India has been trying to fast track those projects. Not just this, work is also on the Shahpur Kandi Dam project, which is the second Satluj Beas link in Punjab. So government also is working to ensure that If we are not able to modify the treaty, at least we make the best use of the provisions that are given in the treaty. Now, in the upcoming meeting between the two permanent commissions on the two sides on 20th of Feb, we would see how Pakistan now raises new objections on India's projects and how India deals with it. These are the articles we wanted to discuss today. A couple of practice questions. Number one, what are the major provisions of the Indus Water Treaty? Why are some of these provisions seen as being unfavorable towards India? Second, for far too long we have made the mistake of seeing agriculture only as a way to ensure food security. Discuss. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.